Hello and welcome to Totally Unrelated. My name is Diana.
And I am Irina.
And we're back with part 2 of the review of a review. Abby Shapiro's take on Jonathan Haidt's book called The Righteous Mind. Irina, a short recap of our discussion so far, if you will.
So, in our last discussions, we talked about the general concept of the book, the fact that the book has 3 parts, and in the first part, Haidt explains about how moral intuitions arise automatically and almost instantaneously, long before, moral reasoning. How in part 2 he presents his research about morality, and how in part 3 he tries to show the usefulness of his research and how you can use this knowledge in order to better communicate with people. And Madame Shapiro starts her discussion directly from part 3. And she straight away mischaracterizes the whole intent of the book by excluding a whole chunk of society that she defines as wokist, whatever that is.
The bad people. It's the bad people.
Yeah, there are definitely the bad people that are beyond salvation, and she sort of goes on a tangent from there, So that was pretty much the gist of it.
But she does reach across the aisle to liberals, whom she deems redeemable somewhat, until further notice.
Well, she definitely does not define these categories. Like, how do you know who lands in what category? But there are definitely only 3 categories of people, and one of them is bad.
That's how she keeps people on their toes. It's like, you never know how I'm going to judge you, so beware.
Yeah, so 3 groups of people. One of them are definitely bad. One of them are definitely, good and always right, and are the ones in the middle who just need to be convinced to go on the right side. So then we can be like it was always meant to be, just 2 groups of people. The good people and the evil people.
Very biblical.
Very biblical, yeah. Okay, so moving on from the summary. Next on Madame Shapiro's talking points from the book is the acronym WEIRD. And what she says about this is actually correct. I mean, she sometimes makes correct statements.
Yeah.
It happens, even to her.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Okay. So WEIRD is an acronym that Haidt uses, but that he actually took from the article of some of his colleagues, named The Weirdest People in the World. The author pointed out that nearly all research in psychology is conducted on a very small subset of human population. People from cultures that are Western, that are educated, are industrialized, rich, and democratic, and thus forming the acronym WEIRD. And they reviewed dozens of studies showing that weird people are actually statistical outliers. They say that, weird are the least typical, the least representative people you could study if you want to make generalization about human nature. And that even with the West and Americans are more extreme outliers than Europeans. And within the United States, the educated upper middle class is the most unusual of all.
Curious. When it was like, researchers and professors or even activists pointing this stuff out, that studies have a sort of a selection bias, and that may be, for anything that has to do with human behavior, you need more diversity to avoid distortions. Maybe don't always choose preponderantly neurotypical individuals of a certain age, sex, socioeconomic status, educational level, or cultural background. When it was these people pointing this stuff out, the naysayers were mocking them for, being obsessed with the idea of diversity. They would call them basically loonies, blinded by political correctness, who just wanted to wedge their politics into the sacred door of science. And, lo and behold, this idea becomes very useful to give praise to when you can cast doubt on the scientific validity of the information that your political opponents use to argue their position.
I mean, I talking about outliers, I mean, this sort of discussion that wanting diversity in your study group is only a discussion with a certain segment of, Americans or something, because never in science has, maybe not never, but at least not in modern science has ever been a scientist going like, I really think all my subjects that I study should really be all the same.
All my friends, actually, all my friends who share all my interests and are basically my twins.
All of the studies that had limitations about the study group, because it happens because you don't have enough money, you don't have enough time, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And always in the conclusion of any article written about whatever you studied, you also say what the weaknesses of your studies are. Mm-hmm. And this always comes up, like we only had time to, study this amount of people or only this segment or whatever.
So basically what you're saying is that good scientists sort of already knew the limitations of their work. Because, as you said, because of maybe not having enough resources allocated or enough time to do the study the way they would wish to do it. And they knew this even perhaps before the idea was formulated maybe by sociologists or anthropologists. So this is just on the basis of, to do better science, we would need maybe more time and more resources, right? So it's not like, this is just a problem, because this is another point that some people bring up that, these are just problems people invented. Like, the sociologists invented this problem or this oppression, and we didn't know that this thing existed beforehand. Well, we did, but maybe we didn't have the language to talk about it in the public sphere, or maybe it was too technical to seem relevant to people outside a very specific domain.
And I have to admit that every time I see a public discussion about scientific paper, the discussion never resembles the paper. Because when you write you know that what you are writing is going to be a scientific paper, you know that it's going to be peer reviewed, you know that other people that are actually looking to tear down your conclusions are going to look at all those things. So you write it in the correct way. But even the people who probably do the study, well, most of them are not public figures, but if they are really in love with their idea, when they talk about it freely, they don't formulate their, phrases the way they do in a scientific article.
Yeah.
I mean, so, yeah, but what I mean is that in the rigorous sense of science, this has been known and discussed and took for, the granted thing that we discuss the weakness of our
endeavor.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that Haidt notices about the weird group is their tendency towards individualism, their way of seeing all things just in relation to themselves, and not necessarily as the way that that thing or that action relates to relationships, to context, to groups and institutions. And from there on, Haidt is starting to explain how he went around the world to see how people from different countries, from different educational backgrounds, from different social economic status relate to moral issues. And he came to see that the differences, he came to see what the differences and the common ground were.
Yeah. I just wanted to add another thing that I was reminded of when you talked about the whole weird bias. That sort of pissed me off when I listened to Abby, because it feels like she's trying to sort of, when she talks about the weird bias, she's trying to sort of flip to her advantage, of course, to her discursive advantage, the whole criticism of you're doing a colonialism or imperialism thing. It's like, oh, you're imposing these weird standards upon the world, and you should know that you're an outlier, which this sort of criticism is very valid, because it's true that by considering themselves as the measure of all things, the golden standard, the default par excellence, white people, well, white men in general, have actually produced some really bad science. And I don't just mean bad in terms of, I don't like it, it's nasty, get it off of me, but like like phrenology, eugenics, treatments for female hysteria. I mean, this is all just some really bad science fails that have had some horrific consequences. So, like I said, this is a valid critique of bad scientific practice, but like, what exactly is Abby suggesting with it? Like, is she suggesting anything at all? Or does she just sort of revel in the opportunity of calling liberals weird, which I suspect she does?
Yeah, she just sort of says it and doesn't. It didn't necessarily feel like she was trying to use the adjective on liberals. She sort of just, brought it up for some more for the point of saying that somehow her people have been ignored all this time.
Yeah, because, on the one hand, I'd love to believe that she wants studies to do better in picking a larger and more diverse sample group so that the results they provide are better. But, like, I have an inkling that she just wants more conservatives in there.
Definitely. That was her. That was her angle. Definitely. Here you say things like phrenology and eugenics and all that, and putting them in the science, even if failed science category. I realized that it is definitely true that going to school and having a formal education sort of shapes your mind, and my mind just recoils. I'm like, no, nobody ever thought phrenology was a science. Like, no. I don't know. Like, my mind does not go there ever. When somebody says science, for me it's modern science, and like that was mumbo jumbo. That was like there were none of the characteristics of any sort of accurate way of looking at things at all. Like, I honestly think it's in bad faith to call anything before 1950 science.
But isn't this like a sort of no true Scotsman fallacy? As in, even though
we have bad science today. We have bad science today. But like, it's actually bad science. That was like bad storytelling. I don't know.
Yeah, but like looking back on it, of course, it's easy to just weed out the really horrendously bad from what were sort of like the emerging bones of what would become the scientific method, right?
Sure.
But also, if you think about how it functioned and the role it fulfilled, it did have the legitimacy, it did have the power to shape public discourse. So in effect, it was fulfilling the role of science, even though it was not. So
I'm not denying that. I'm not denying. I mean, but you could call it religion just as well, I mean, what I'm trying to say is yes, definitely people in power used certain ideas to their advantage, and they used themselves, to promote ideas that are very revolutionary, like, lords breed lords.
The very revolutionary concept of rich people being better by,
virtue of
their
rich.
Birth.
Yeah, but I mean, if you didn't have a structure, if like anything goes was actually the norm, like if you just had the money and the title and you could just say things, you can't really be like, that was badly done. It was not done at all. It was just like stated, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think until people started realizing a lot of things, and I genuinely appreciate the people who realized the problems they were having way back in the day where it was like nothing there. Mm-hmm. I mean, the first guy that was like, what do you mean you're trying to to operate on humans when you don't know how a human looks on the inside? And we should do these pictures every time we cut dead bodies or live bodies, and draw pictures so we can all know actually what's going to happen.
Faggot, trying to do art. Oh, get him out of here.
And actually, you know, like the first guy, this is a story from another of Siddhartha Mukherjee's book, Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies. And he goes through the story sort of medical discoveries that led up to cancer treatment. And it's the story of the guy, I don't remember his name, that was like, people, don't you think we're doing this, you know, badly? But I cannot, I was totally in love with the guy instantaneously, going like, you're in a whole fucking society that everybody just goes like, yeah, we will cut people up. What do you do after that? We don't know. And he's like, but we could know. You know, and that's how the whole thing of Atlas is also the name in, I don't even know if it's the same word in English.
Yeah, it's picture books for people who want to cut other people up. Commonly known as surgeons.
Commonly known as surgeon. Yeah, not serial
killers.
The
artist formerly known as.
Yeah. So sure, there have been people that were just like, all of this is bloody stupid. And like the guy the first guy who said also, I mean, I would just go back in time and just like, I would totally worship these people. The first guy that said, I think we should stop naming diseases after whatever dude. We should name diseases with a name that describes the disease. So we all will know what the fuck we're talking about.
Or instead of naming a disease by the nation or people you hate the most at that time, you know, like the pox was named the French disease by the English, the Spanish disease or the Italian disease by the French or something like that. So everyone just named horrendous illnesses after whatever enemy of the day was.
Yeah, and like let's have a name that is actually a fair description of the disease. So no matter who's talking, has a certain sense of what this whole thing is about. So yeah, there have been many people who throughout history realized the limitations of what they were doing. Mm-hmm. But I genuinely think that up until the time where when scientists went up against the tobacco industry, when they started the discussion about whether tobacco causes cancer or doesn't, and there were no sort of ideas in place about how you go to how you can show causality when it is about chronic disease and it is about the possibility of a multifactorial disease. Mm-hmm. Because people knew how you go about acute diseases that have like one cause, the infectious diseases. Mm-hmm. That was quite obvious, but like how do you go about a multifactorial chronic disease? How do you go about showing causality? And for me, that's sort of when science started, actually. Mm-hmm. Because that's when they started to think about, we have to have these rules in place about how you do a study, what a study is.
Yeah, Irina, but where's the mystery in that? Where you know what you're going to find when you cut up someone and you have like standardized names.
My point was that I realized that I feel very maternal hostile towards science. And I'm like, that wasn't the problem. The problem was there was no science. Okay, moving on. Here is where Haidt says what I pointed out in the beginning. He says there's more to morality than harm and fairness. I'm going to try and convince you that this principle is true descriptively. That is as a portrait of moralities we see when we look around the world. I'll set aside the question of whether any of these alternative moralities are really good, true, or justifiable. He does step outside this paradigm, but he does this on his own opinion. And yes, he is annoying when he does it. I mean, I do mean he is annoying to me, not like universally.
But your opinion is the one that counts.
Always. So especially because he positions himself as a sort of centrist, although he does not describe himself as that. And my prior bias towards centrist just makes me cringe a lot more at this.
Yeah, I feel you.
But one thing that the book does that filled me with this glee is poke a little the great thinking men of past, such as Kant. And the book underlines that we want to discover how the moral mind actually works, not how it ought to work, and that can't be done by reasoning, math, or logic. And after describing what weird stands for, Madame Shapiro does one of her evil little things. She takes the descriptive point that for some people there is more to morality than harm and fairness, and says that this is a feather in the conservatives' cap, and then says that the whole point is for conservatives to convince liberals that what they intuitively feel to be moral and immoral is actually the truth by concocting harm and fairness arguments. She has the decency, somewhat, to say that Haidt does not say this in his book, but she follows by saying that she thought that this is one of the book's failings.
Well, you see, liberals are like your little brother, who can only write using all caps. He can only use fairness and harm to interpret the world around him, but it's okay. You know, he's not hopelessly dumb, unlike your progressive cousin who can only communicate via finger painting. He just needs your condescending guidance. So, it's like you have this, what should we call it? This white elder brother burden that you've taken upon yourself.
Yeah, she does sound pretty much like that. She then passes on to the science part of the book, the part where Haidt makes his claim about what he thinks and the main foundations of morality around the world. But before I get on to that, I have to talk about one particular chapter that I really like in the book, and that Shapiro also touches upon in her own, self-serving sort of way, the chapter about innateness. This idea about what is and is not innate and what is the usefulness of knowing that just keeps popping up. And I think Haidt has some very good points here. He gives this quote: "Nature bestows upon the newborn a considerably complex brain, but one that is best seen as pre-wired, flexible, and the subject to change, rather than hardwired, fixed and immutable. So the brain is like a book, the first draft of which is written by the genes during fetal development. No chapters are complete at birth, and some are just rough outlines waiting to be filled in during childhood. But not a single chapter, be it on sexuality, language, food preferences, or morality, consists of blank pages on which a society can inscribe any conceivable set of words."
That also matches what we've discussed previously with Siddhartha Mukherjee's book. He also says that you're not a tabula rasa, although no. there have always been these conflicting sort of groups, the ones who think that, oh yes, everything is innate and you're sort of your genetics is your destiny, and the other group that is like, no, we can rebuild
change everything.
People. Yeah, we can change everything about everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Since the Nazis and the communists, this has been the debate. And no, I'm kidding. Obviously, since before that, but they were definitely ones that took it to the next level. So nature provides a first draft, which experience then revises. Built in does not mean unmalleable. It means organized in advance of experience. And I think this is one of the best description of what innate is. I really like that, organized in advance of experience. So based on these ideas, Haidt proposes that moral foundations are innate. People whose genes gave them brains that get a special pleasure from novelty, variety, and diversity, while simultaneously being less sensitive to sign of threats, are predisposed, but not predestined, to become liberals.
Interesting. But I think that, I mean, of course, people don't usually sit in front of like a selection screen and like pick their political affiliation and then consistently tick all the ideologically appropriate boxes in terms of their day-to-day choices. And actually, sometimes we point to such incongruences and call people hypocrites. The holier-than-thou traditional values guy who turns out to be a serial adulterer, the socially liberal who actively supports measures that keep marginalized groups barely scraping by. And of course, fair enough, some of these cases are clearly signs of hypocrisy. But mostly, I think that this is the result of the malleability of built-in tendencies that you mentioned before. And I think the degree to which one moral foundation is more dominant over another is contextual. So, as Chris Rock put it in one of his shows, I got some shit I am conservative about, I got some shit I am liberal about. So
yeah, of course.
And I also think there's this other thing that I'm not quite sure how to describe other than maybe semantics, in the sense that there are different keys in which you can interpret the same instinct that you might have. So, for instance, if you're reluctant to move, as I am at this time in my life, to move outside the country, so to speak, having had the experience of living abroad for a few years, and I use this as an argument, the fact that the friendships I have at this moment and the support network that they provide for me at home is something that I value a lot, and I'm not sure I would be able to replicate elsewhere, or replicate to the same extent or within a reasonable time frame. So that can be seen as a very conservative streak within me, right? Because there's a certain lack of enthusiasm for novelty, for exploration, for possibly a disruptive change, right? And you can also read some fear into it, right? The fear of not belonging. But an emphasis on personal relationships and community over perhaps material benefits and opportunities is also something that many people with a sort of leftist political views, or maybe humanists, would find valuable and would cherish. So maybe moving abroad for the sake of friendship, moving abroad for the sake of maybe money or career opportunities over friendships is something that you could also interpret in that key. So I just think like there are so many layers to this besides just sort of the share of the stock you have in different moral foundations. Individuals might adhere to a political team, for instance, at one particular time in their life, and they also might adopt certain stances on issues that aren't actually totally in line with their moral instincts, right? Because take, for instance, the vehement opposition to abortion. That was not sort of part of the conservative menu until a few decades ago. And by that, I don't mean that, all people were okay, everyone was okay with abortion. No, I just mean it in the sense that it wasn't such a staple, such an exclusively almost conservative stance. And plenty of liberals or people who would define themselves as liberals were also sort of anti-abortion or, but as conservatives made this pretty much their thing, there are probably plenty of those who usually consider themselves as more liberal who readjusted their views on that topic, at least in public.
Mm-hmm.
And, on the flip side, certainly not every single union leader is by default supportive of gay and trans rights, but some have made a point of at least paying lip service to the idea. So
yeah, sure. People don't live in ideologies. People live in actual life, and there are many reasons for why people say the things they say and do the things they do. And not always morality or their initial feeling of what is moral is necessarily the basis of what they say and what they do every single time. So yeah, of course. So Haidt also touches on this, saying that individuals tend to develop certain characteristic adaptations and life narratives that make them resonate unconsciously and intuitively with the grand narratives told by political movements. Once people join a political team, they get sort of into the moral matrix of that political team. They see confirmation of their grand narrative everywhere, and it's difficult or even impossible to convince them that they are wrong if you argue with them from outside of their metrics. So, circling back to the idea of moral foundations, Haidt breaks them down into 6 dichotomies. 1 is care versus harm, 2 is fairness versus cheating, 3 loyalty versus betrayal, 4 authority versus subversion, 5 sanctity versus degradation, and 6 liberty versus oppression. He then explains how some people tend to have just 3 of these foundations turned up really high, whereas others have all 6. It's mostly a matter of degrees for most people, but the degree to which you ascribe moral values to an action or a fact makes a lot of difference. On the other hand, Madame Shapiro describes this as liberals having just 1 foundation, which Haidt never says, and conservatives having many more. She really makes a mess of this, but, well, she does try to score points, so that is to be expected of her.
And just like as a brief example of what Haidt says when he highlights that there is a degree to which you ascribe moral values to an action or a fact. I think he does give an example about the flag burning, or using the flag as a sort of to dust something off.
Actually, it's not so much. Of course, there are examples, but all the examples in the book are actually the stories that he presented to the people he talked to for his study. So that all of the examples, he gives many of them, and he also in the book you can also go to the link of the questions from his study, and you can do them for yourself. It was that of the flag, and I think and that of the dog that were the ones that sort of stuck in people's minds. The fact that he presents this person, actually it was a woman in the example, a woman finds this very old flag in the house, and she just uses the flag to dust up her house. And then she asks people, he asks people if they think she can be patriotic, if she can love her country, and people answer yes or no. But what was interesting, because if you understand how he did the studies, himself and the people he trained, then first ask the question, people give an answer, and then they go, but she's a veteran, like she fought for the country. when people say she cannot love her country, and they just go like, yeah, but maybe now because she was injured in war, now she hates her country, and they keep giving these more and more elaborate answers by making up a story.
Yeah, because their first
actually said that.
Yeah, because their first instinct was, this is repulsive. The woman is using the symbol for such a mundane task. And then from then on, they just started to spin a story.
Yeah, because the point is what he's trying to make, that moral intuition comes before reasoning. And the reasoning is what you pile on, not in search of truth, but in search of maintaining what your first impression was. And the other story is that of the dog, about a family who had a dog, and the dog died of natural causes, and they ate him. And, is this a moral action or an immoral action? And of course people start with, no, this cannot be a moral action. And they start making up how that family could not have loved their dog and so on, but nobody actually have a cohesive argument about why is it bad to eat a perfectly good animal. why wasting the meat is a good idea, and this one with the dog, it was the one I enjoyed telling my friends back when I read the book, and it was funny to see that even my friends they're definitely
and I'm assuming particularly your husband's friends who are all dog lovers.
No, actually not. I just mean my friends, because my friends are all somewhat liberal inclined, and they all had like this reaction, even if they didn't want to place a morality stamp on it, they were like, yeah, of course it's not about morality, but it's bad anyway. And I'm like, but if it's bad, then it's morality.
It's also weird because, for instance, many times we don't manage to distinguish between something that is like, how you say something like, oh, this is interesting, an interesting, I don't know, dress or shoe. I wouldn't wear it, but it looks good on other people. I acknowledge it looks good on other people. So, there are sometimes things that, yes, you cannot help but feel unease or disgust, but it's like you can still point out the fact that I wouldn't do it, but it's not immoral per se, but I wouldn't do it. I definitely feel like I wouldn't do it. So usually it's like, I wouldn't do it, it's disgusting, hence immoral.
Yeah. But this is what it's all about. This is what the book is all about. So circling back to the idea of moral foundations, let's also, we've discussed what they are, and then according to Haidt, the moral foundations evolved as follows. The Care and Harm Foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of caring for vulnerable children. It makes us sensitive to signs of suffering and need. It makes us despise cruelty and want to care for those who are suffering. And the Fairness Cheating Foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of reaping the rewards of cooperation without getting exploited. It makes us sensitive to indications that another person is likely to be a good or bad partner for collaboration and reciprocal altruism. It makes us want to shun or punish cheaters. And fairness is a concern across all types of people. But the more conservative people equate fairness more with proportionality, the idea that people should get what they deserve based on what they have done, whereas more leftist-leaning people equate fairness more with equality and equal rights. And this distinction makes conservatives say that liberals don't care about fairness, and actually also the vice versa is true. Because of these differing interpretations of fairness and cheating foundation that people have, Haidt split the idea of fairness and also added liberty versus oppression as a separate category. So liberty versus oppression makes people notice and resent any sign of attempted domination. It triggers an urge to band together and to resist or, overthrow bullies and tyrants. This foundation supports the egalitarianism and the anti-authoritarianism of the left, as well as the don't tread on me and give me liberty, anti-government anger of libertarians and some conservatives.
I mean, this is peak centrism here, because come on, it's not the same when, as a libertarian, you're all about freedom, 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 and don't tread on me. But also you're very big on having the police and the army to enforce the things that you deem are necessary. So I don't know. It's a bit sketchy, but fair enough. He wants to ingratiate himself with both ends of the spectrum, I guess.
I don't think it's about trying to make himself look a certain way. I think he just points out what certain groups actually say about themselves. He doesn't discuss if there are inconsistencies among the many views of a certain category.
Oh yeah, that's fair enough.
And then the Loyalty Betrayal Foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of forming and maintaining coalitions. It makes us sensitive to signs that another person is or is not a team player. And it makes us trust and reward such people, and it makes us want to hurt, ostracize, or even kill those who betray us or our group. And then the Authority Subversion Foundation evolved in response to the adaptive challenge of forging relationships that will benefit us within social hierarchies. It makes us sensitive to signs of rank or status and to signs that other people are or are not behaving properly given their position. And the last, the Sanctity versus Degradation Foundation, evolved initially in response to the adaptive challenges of the omnivore's dilemma, and then to the broader challenge of living in a world of pathogens and parasites. It includes the behavioral immune system, which can make us wary of a diverse array of symbolic objects and threats. It makes it possible for people to invest objects with irrational and extreme values, both positive and negative, which are important for binding groups together.
Yeah, like the flag.
So, yeah. Haidt takes some time to explain why the Democratic Party in the US is not more popular and why it loses more than it wins. And I have to agree with him. I mean, his points were valid because he points out all the ways in which Republicans know how to address the elephant and not the rider, and how Republicans have monopolized some themes such as family, religion, and the military, and shows that there is no reason the Democrats could not reframe these themes and use them to convince people about their own policies, but they just don't.
Yeah. I mean, we're making the assumption that Democrats actually want to win. And I mean this in the sense that they would want to win so that they can then enact an agenda that got people excited. In previous episodes, I talked with Elisa about how many radical parties in the late 19th century and early 20th century were so good at crafting attention-grabbing speeches, images, catchphrases, and stuff like that, because they wanted to grab political power and actually use it to affect society, for better or worse. So it was only natural for them to have a strong stance on loaded issues such as religion, the family, or the military, because they were outside the halls of power, and they had a limited patience or deference towards protocols, civility, or being rational or factually correct. And, meanwhile, just as today, liberals of yore seem to be sort of trapped in a rational bro universe. They would say things like, surely if we give the people the right information, they will rationally assess the facts and come to the right conclusions. But emotions play a pivotal role in politics, and that's a feature, not a bug. People need to feel inspired, to be jolted out of their default, whatever state. And especially when we're talking about sort of a scope that goes beyond individual ambitions. And Yeah, politicians like Obama provided inspiration in spades, but unfortunately, that was just a sort of emotional spark that quite quickly fizzled out without clear intentions that would then translate into actions. Because you kind of want to have all three to capture the public's attention and govern effectively. One, you need the message that moves people emotionally. Two, the actual intent on making good on your promises. And three, capturing the means to do so. And Democrats in the US, they sometimes get lucky with a once-in-a-generation charismatic public speaker whose words create a lot of excitement, but they repeatedly fall short on the action side. That has happened so frequently in the past couple of decades that I'm not frankly surprised that many are questioning the party's intent on actually doing something when they get into power, and they see them more as men of the system, preoccupied with securing a place within the structure rather than using the structure, so to speak, to help their constituents.
I mean, I think you went into a very complicated place. And honestly, I think you just did it because that's how you think. Because the easy way to think about things is this. For sure, everybody wants power. I mean, if you go into politics, I don't mean like everybody on the planet, but like if you do the work, and it is work, like I've been for 2.5 years in a political party at a very low level, just for my community, and it takes a lot of your time. So the people who actually want to be, I don't know, they run for Senate, or they run for Congress, or they run for president, they actually want the power. And Republicans, it's not like they do something to actually improve people's life. So what Haidt is saying is that, okay, you realize that you could get more votes by actually also talking about family. You could totally reframe, let's say, having healthcare as this whole thing about how that could improve the life of your family.
Absolutely. Make it conservative.
Yeah. Whether or not you manage to actually do some sort of law, you can keep talking about it for years on end, and you can keep winning because this is what Republicans do and Democrats don't. It's not like the Democratic Party is a party of doers. It's a party also of talking points. And the point Haidt was making was that the talking points of the Democrats are really lame. I mean, you could, after they win, talk about how they don't deliver or whatever, but even Obama.
Well, they do deliver, but I think to a very specific segment of the population, and that is one of the problems, because both parties are very good at passing certain things that don't necessarily benefit the world at large.
Yeah. Oh well, let's not let's go back to let's go back to Haidt and Madame Shapiro. Madame Shapiro's last minutes of the review, she points out that all conservatives have to do is to explain how religion and family values and so on are good. And yes, some people might use them for evil, but just ignore those because it's not the value in itself that might cause the problem, but the evilness of the people. And just focus on all the good that can come from religious views and such. And she has this delicious take at the end. When you don't have real religion, you make one up. And I just, laughed out loud at this one. Like, she said this in the context of trying to explain why some people treat their political views as religion, which, fair point. But still, the way she framed it, it was so damn silly,
Yeah. And also, I just don't get it. Because on the one hand, she berates, liberals and people on the left for the fact that basically they don't have the strong convictions that a religious person might have. Like they don't have like a moral compass or, you know, a guiding light that a guiding set of principles and but also you know, when they do have that, they are you know, their values are made into a religion, and she says that like it's a bad thing. But like, so basically she's not actually saying that there's a problem with sticking religiously to some principles or other. Basically what she's saying is that not all religions are valid. As we all know, there is but one true God, and his name is Allah.
Yeah, no, her point is that you do have to be extremely obsessed with following the rules as long as I make them.
Of course.
Which, you know, fair enough. I feel the same.
Looking forward to that Irina Abby death match.
So next, Abby just goes on for about 2 minutes about how liberals don't understand conservatives. But Haidt said that in the sense that liberals don't understand how to appeal to conservative emotions.
You know, you just don't like get me. Not like the other girls. Yeah, but like, seriously now, Abby also says here that liberals are too focused on individuals to understand the value of community, and talk about things that make you roll your eyes. Because yes, it was totally a liberal or a leftist who said that there is no such thing as a society, just a living structure of individuals, families, neighbors, and voluntary associations. There is no common good, but just a constant back and forth between individuals and groups to negotiate their interests. You know, totally forgetting that individuals don't have the same negotiating power because, you know, we start from a position of inequality. And that's the whole goddamn reason why people started banding together. And, you know, yes, there is a merit to the idea of encouraging people to do as much as possible at the local level, in smaller, more agile networks of solidarity, rather than to wait around for a response from more sluggish, centralized structures. Yes, that's true, but you don't build a national railway infrastructure for a neighborhood fund, Abby. So, I don't know, I just get so annoyed by how inane this argument is. And before I fly off the handle here, it has to be said that there are some conservatives who do think that unchecked individualism can be detrimental. When people aren't embedded into society in any meaningful way, they feel alienated. So, you know, like we discussed about when we had the episode with Karl Lueger and the Christian Socials, this was one of the points they criticized about liberalism and individualism. But at the same time, the same self-described conservatives will throw the idea of solidarity out the window when it comes to concrete measures like resource reallocation, making public services better and more easily available to all of us. You know, the things that actually provide people with the boots they need for the whole bootstrap narrative they like so much. And I feel like there's something really callous about being like, yeah, community, it's a good thing. Except, actually, what I want is to sort of fence off solidarity between income groups or races or whatever, and, you know, the poors and the non-white people can be solidary among themselves if they want to improve their lot in life, but they better not ask for anything from me. Sorry, this was just like a pet peeve I wanted to just shove into this. But I just get slightly triggered when I hear any discussion about the importance of community and how you don't get community, you lefty or you libtard. And like,
well, I mean, this is not the place.
It's always the place.
One of the many problems. one of the many problems of the discourse in America, because it is not necessarily the discourse everywhere. It just feels in Romania that it is everywhere because Romanians are obsessed with Americans. But in America, they conflate every time they talk about left and right. They conflate the economic orientation, because left and right is more of an economic orientation, and they conflate it with the social orientation between authoritarian, that would be the extremes would not be left and right, would be libertarians and dictatorship or authoritarianism at the other end. And you can definitely have a left authoritarian or a left libertarian, because like libertarians, the first libertarians, weirdly enough, were leftists actually. And you can definitely have a right libertarian, that are the people that generally we think about. And you can also have a right authoritarian. But the fact that people conflate the economical axis with a somewhat structurally, socially, whatever structure, makes the conversation even stupider than, it already is. For me, anyway. So Madame Shapiro goes on to say other stupid stuff, like the fact that liberals don't understand that conservatives are just right about everything, and if only they would understand, then liberals would also want the exact same policies conservatives want.
There is no such thing as conflicting interests.
No.
I feel like there's so much division in the animal kingdom, there's no reason why carnivores and herbivores cannot reach across the aisle and harken back to the good old days of bipartisanship.
Totally no. So, all in all, Madame Shapiro took some points from the book and ran with them into her own purpose, mainly, which, it's after all understandable if one read the book. It is what the book is all about, which makes Shapiro's take actually funny, but also useful in a sort of case study sort of way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, moving on from whatever Abby Shapiro said, the third part of the book is about the human tendencies to be groupish. Here is where Haidt tries to make a case for his idea that group selection exists. He has some interesting ideas. One can read them and can remain agnostic, science-wise about them. But they are not some crazy thoughts, and I find them useful, regardless of whether or not group selection can be proven to exist. So Haidt talks about the major transitions in evolution that are rare, but even if rare, they have been the most important in shaping life on Earth, and how these major transitions have been the one who favored major selection, favored group selection and adaptation, and not just, the individual selection. His second reason for group selection is shared intentionality. And what he means by this is the ability to share mental representations of tasks that two or more people can pursue together. And he points out that this must have been a very important moment in our species' evolution. He says that when everyone in a group began to share a common understanding of how things were supposed to be done, and then felt a flash of negativity when any individual violated those expectations, that's when the first moral matrix was born.
Basically, how do you actually put on the toilet paper roll?
Yeah, that's like we all know how it is correct. And let's not go there.
Exactly. And we shun everyone who does it incorrectly.
Absolutely. And he even points to the idea that that language could have arisen only after the development of shared intentionality, because a word is not a relationship between a sound and an object. It is an agreement among people who share a joint representation of the things in their world, and who share a set of conventions for communicating with each other about those things. And the third point around group selection is that genes and culture co-evolve. So that culture at any point, and by culture he means any sort of group activity. For him, domesticating animals is part of culture. So domesticating animals led some people to keep drinking milk because it was, easily available. And that led to a mutation for the digestion of lactose during adulthood. And that led to more animals being raised, and, that changed society.
So, yeah.
So culture at any point can put pressure on individuals, and in doing so, fostering group cohesion, suppressing aggression and free riding within the group, and defending the territory shared by the community.
Mm-hmm.
And his fourth point is that even if evolution is slow, sometimes it can also be fast. I honestly did not do the reading to see if what he says here, because he gives some examples, and I did not check them, so I did not put them here.
Sounds very Leninist, because I think wasn't Lenin who said, like, there are centuries or decades where nothing happens, and weeks in which decades happen, or something of that sort.
I am not exactly a Lenin scholar, so I have no idea what Lenin said.
Yeah.
So in sum, Haidt's point is that our minds were designed not only to help us win the competition within our groups, but also to help us unite with those in our group to win competition across groups. And that we developed the ability, under special circumstances, to transcend self-interest and to lose ourselves, temporarily and ecstatically in something larger than ourselves. And Haidt says that we can see these special circumstances of temporarily and ecstatically groups action in things like religious group gatherings, but also in things like sport events or raves. And, in an intuition kind of way, I really felt his point.
Yeah, especially when it comes to sports, I think.
Yeah, you can totally see it.
Yeah.
Something growing so big, even if it has like no importance, that people could kill you for it in that instance, and they wouldn't know why. Yeah.
And it's not just like the highly emotionally charged moments, like supporters, as you said, getting very aggressive or very, hostile maybe towards the opposing team, but also in things like maybe if the local club has financial problems, and people who wouldn't usually be like, yeah, sure, public funds, use them for, helping people in need. They will, many a times they will be like, yes, use the money from my taxes to save the, the football team.
Yeah. Have my pension fund for my football team.
Yeah, which is, if you think about it, so
insane,
irrational. I mean, yeah.
So the book ends with the defining of what morality is for Haidt. He says that moral systems are interlocking sets of values, virtues, norms, practices, identities, institutions, technology, and evolved psychological mechanisms that work together to suppress or to regulate self-interests and to make cooperative societies possible. Haidt's conclusion is that morality binds and blinds. It binds us into ideological teams that fight each other as though the fate of the world depended on our side winning, each battle. And it blinds us to the fact that each team is composed of good people who have something important to say.
Radical centrism strikes it again.
Yeah, no, he really doesn't mean it in a radical centrism kind of way, not in the truth is in the middle kind of way, but in the fact that when you are, just screaming at the other person, you might sort of lose some of the actual arguments.
I think that it's also the case that, as you said, because a lot of, especially in politics, a lot of the discussion has been turned into basically a sport sport-like event, in the sense that people pick a team if they are involved in the sporting event at all. They pick a team and then they just stick to their colors, regardless of whether or not actually even the stuff that the team promotes hurts them or not. And I think that this is even more, this is even worse than just, maybe, people on the other side might also have something good to say. It's sometimes you just go in for a team that is actively doing things that hurt you. So, yeah.
Yeah. So now it is, it is crystal clear that Haidt talks about what morality does, and not about what is moral or about who wins the debate about what is good and what is evil. He clearly states that doing a scientific descriptive paper about morality is very different from the field of normative ethics that is concerned with figuring out which actions are truly right or wrong. And the funniest part, after also reading the book I mentioned in the beginning, Moral Tribes, is that Haidt endorses utilitarianism as the only version of normative ethics that, with some modification and with full knowledge of descriptive morality, could be embraced by all the human race. And the reason I think this is funny is because Joshua Green, the author of Moral Tribes, he somehow argues in his book, he mentions Haidt and he says he wants to argue against Haidt, and as if Haidt might oppose utilitarianism, which he really doesn't. But also Joshua Green sort of acts, and I'm sure in the case of Joshua Green, the author, he just does it for his own purposes, because I'm sure he understood that Haidt was writing a descriptive book and not a normative book, but he somehow acts like that's what the book was. So I think like the Haidt's biggest problem with this book is how everybody else talks about it.
Nobody gets him. No,
I don't really think I don't think that it's one of those things where things are very complicated. It's just that people read it and then they were like, how can I make this useful for me? Which is actually what the book is all about.
Yeah.
That's how we are as, animals. That's how we function.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess we're done, right? We're done with this. Yeah, well, we've made the best of yet another book that we've read.
And that we encourage if anybody is actually interested and listen to this conversation, highly encourage people to actually read the book.
So thank you for listening, and if you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to follow us and share any episodes you like on whatever social media you might be active on. And if you have any suggestions, hate mail or encouragements, we await them via email, or you can hit us up on Twitter. And I guess that's it. Bye.
Bye-bye.